Good evening, and welcome to Hope for Healing. I'm your host, Dr. John Stracks, joining you this time from my home office in Chicago. Don't worry about the plant that's normally over my left shoulder. It'll be back next month. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a physician who focuses on the reduction and elimination of symptoms using mind-body medicine methods. If you'd like to learn more about my practice, including how to work with me or any of my team, you can find more information about our services at www.drstracks.com. This Hope for Healing videocast series is one of many joint efforts between me and the folks at Curable. For those who are not yet Curable users, Curable is an amazing app that offers science-based techniques for chronic pain recovery. We've been working together since their inception about 6 years ago. We created this video series to further help you understand the connection between what's happening in your life and what's happening in your body. Today, my guest is Michael Murray. I first met Mike about 3 years ago after he'd experienced an unrelenting cycle of pain over the course of about a decade. In the later of those years, he had started to develop a number of physical injuries, seemingly with no explanation. After going through hip replacement surgery, Mike began to understand the connection between mind and body, and that's when his true healing began. He's agreed to join me here this evening and talk more about this and what he's learned in that time since then. Mike, thanks so much for being here and welcome to Hope for Healing.
Great. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So glad you're here and excited to spend some time talking with you. It's always helpful for the people who are listening to know what you were dealing with before you started to get better, before you learned about mind-body medicine. Can you describe kind of what happened and what life was like for you over the course of
just
so many years?
Correction. My pain started in 2016. So prior to that, I was healthy. So I thought you had mentioned a decade. It was really only 3 years.
Okay.
So I was fortunate enough to be able to retire at a young age in 2007. Really into the outdoors. Spent a lot of time in Wyoming, where we have a second home. And then in 16, I was out just kind of hiking around in the mountains, developed a hamstring problem. About a month later, developed shoulder problem. And I really became really anxious. Started crying a lot and started isolating myself. These injuries they weren't stopping me from doing anything, but I couldn't do much. Within probably, 3 months of developing the hamstring problem, I finally had an x-ray and the doctor's like, you have arthritis in the hip and hip replacement can work well here. And I just, more tears. And up to this point, I ski 60 days a year. I bike 5 days a week. I'm a fly fisherman, so very active. My world was just shattered. So for the next probably 15 months from that point, I saw 17 different medical doctors. I had pain in my feet, my knees, my neck, both shoulders, heartburn. I couldn't sleep, developed ringing in my ears. I had a hip replacement. I had 2 spinal injections. And when none of that worked, the doctors would always kind of move the goalpost and tell me there's another structural issue going on. And the interesting part is going into all these doctor's appointments, the anxiety I was carrying was intense. And a lot of them I couldn't even speak. Becky, my wife, we would start every appointment saying, just so you know, Mike he's really upset. And he's having a hard time with this. And I didn't even know I know I was upset because I felt I was losing my body. And my one gift I felt like was being in the outdoors. So it just all unraveled quickly. And, Western medicine, certainly didn't help. So it happened quickly. And I just was on a conveyor belt of doctors.
And you were what, in your early 50s?
I was 52 at the time.
Yeah. And just go over it again. So it was hip, you had the hip replacement, but also what, shoulder?
So I ended up I had shoulder surgery 7 years before that incident, but looking back with the new lenses I have, an awareness of the mind-body connection, I am absolutely certain those surgeries were not needed, because those popped out of the blue. And part of the whole journey for me is discovering this anxiety and these insecurities I've held my whole life, and that were buried beneath a veneer of success and confidence. So 2 shoulder surgeries I didn't need, hip replacement I certainly didn't need, and 2 spinal injections that didn't do anything for me.
And you were getting worse. And so this went on for a couple of years. And then at what point did you discover Curable or Dr. Sarno or something about mind-body medicine? Where did that come into the mix?
So one of the last doctors I had seen convinced me, well, he did a test and told me I had neuropathy. So he's like, don't panic, which of course I started to do. Went down to Boston, and the neurologist said the test my physiatrist did wasn't complete, so we had to do another one. And he's preparing me for needles. This guy was all business. And I just said, I've been really anxious the past 2 years. Could this have anything to do with the pain? And I had mentioned this to the 16 previous doctors, and not one of them commented on it. But he said, absolutely, anxiety can cause nerve pain. But there was no further discussion after that. So a month later, I was out in Wyoming by myself, couldn't sleep. I was really upset because I had hiked 3 days in a row, no issue. And then weather came in, I couldn't hike, and my feet were frozen. So a friend had given me a book on how to live with chronic pain. He'd given to me like 5 months earlier, and I didn't want to read it because I wanted to beat it and not manage it. But at this point, I hadn't considered suicide, but I thought about it a lot and thought about others that really were at that point. So I'm like, I've got 3 kids, a wife. I need to figure out how to live with this. So I picked it up, and as soon as I picked it up, I start reading it, talking about Western medicine, how they've missed the boat and they view the body as a complex machine. And I closed the book really quickly just to read the title again. And in smaller print, which I hadn't seen, was The Mind-Body Condition. It was a book by John Sarno. And I got up, made a pot of coffee. I read the whole book in one sitting. And I remember texting my wife at 3 a.m. and said, I think I've finally figured out what's wrong with me. And that was it. And it resonated, just the way he described the hopelessness, the way he described pain can mean more to someone if it really prevents them from what they want to do. And that's really, my story gets more complicated from a personal level, but I define myself as an athlete. And when all these pains, I felt like I couldn't do anything else. And that's where it snowballed from there. So it did not take me long, like within 5 minutes, to realize this was for me. However, I often wonder, because I've seen so many doctors and tried so many things, I did wonder if this was just that as well, just grasping at another solution. I don't think it was, but yeah, it very much resonated with me.
And do you remember what resonated in that way? And so, whoever it was, your friend had given you the book, and in the giving you had heard, here's a book about living with chronic pain, as if the pain was going to be with you for the rest of your life and you would need to learn to manage it. And so what was it about reading it, if you remember, that made you say, oh, I don't have to live with it. I can figure out how to let it go.
There was a page that he listed off all the symptoms that can come from it. And I was on probably a dozen of them. So it was that, but it was also, he talked about what pain can mean to individuals, and it can be all encompassing. And not long before I picked up the book, I remember going for a walk with a friend and telling him, I spend 80% of my time thinking about my pain. In reality, that was a lie. It was really close to 100% truly. Um, and I started put it together, and then I started thinking about what the neurologist said and about that anxiety can cause nerve symptoms. So it all just kind of came together, and just this wave of this is it. This is the path I need to take.
And and two important points there. One, like it gets so consuming. The people who are listening, many of them think about this 80% of the time, 100% of the time. What is it? How do we get rid of it? My own experience, same thing. Like it's just, when I first learned about this 25 years ago, it was all I thought about, all I talked about, all I researched. And it does that to our brain. It just pulls us in and we think about nothing else. And then also people get surprised, especially after they learn about it, that our mind can create pain this bad in our body. We think that if the pain's that bad, it somehow has to be coming from the body because of an injury, but the pain pathways are the same. And so no matter where it's coming from, it can be that intense and it can be that terrible.
Yeah. He also spoke about there was a section about conditioning, like certain things can happen and you will condition your neural pathways to create pain. And I didn't recognize it for a lot of time, but when I was in Wyoming, I could be like really active and the pain would kind of disappear. And I'd come home, land in Boston, and within, it's like clockwork. On the drive back, we live an hour from Boston, the anxiety would come back and some pain somewhere would return. So it did take me some time to actually see that trend. But without question, it was there.
And so then you picked up the book, you read about it, you said, okay, I think this makes sense. And so what happened from there then? You had been involved in the conventional medical world for a couple of years with injections, procedures, and everything else. And so when you were ready to make that switch, walk us through what happened.
Yeah. So, when I made that switch, I did think I was healed, but it doesn't work that way. I was just committed to it. He has in Sarno's book what he calls the daily reminders. So I would take it's all psychological. You're not broken. There's a whole series of things. And I literally, and this is part of also my obsessive behavior, I took a picture with my iPhone and every day I would just read them. So I can't say for the next 2 months I saw any improvement. I was more optimistic. And then I picked up a book called Explain Pain. And that was because Sarno, what I've since learned, while a true visionary, he was off the mark on a few things like the oxygen deprivation, and which I didn't understand, but reading Explain the Pain really filled it in for me. And just one short story, after I read those 2 books, I was in Wyoming and decided to go for a mountain bike ride. I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease and spinal stenosis, and I was told to stay away from any pounding. And I'm like, forget that. And I went for a big mountain bike ride. I'm coming down, and I ended up hitting a rock and tapping my front brake at the wrong time. And I went right over the handlebars, really scared, crashed hard, got up, made sure my new hip was fine, my neck was fine. Probably a half hour goes by, and I finally relaxed, and it was time to move on. I grabbed my bike, and I look on my bike, and there was red all over, and I quickly realized it was blood. Looked at my legs were fine, and I looked at my arms, and they were all cut up. And as soon as I saw that they were cut up, guess what happened? All of a sudden, the pain. So it was my first experience on how the mind controls the pain both ways. You can send pain if there is no tissue damage, or it can repress the pain. So that was a really powerful experience for me, and it validated kind of everything I was doing. But when I came home to New Hampshire that summer, the pain was still there, and that's when I decided to reach out to you. And I met you that August, so it was probably 2 months went by, between 2 or 3 months went by, and I started my journey with you.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the idea how the pain shifts when we get the context for it. And so how it, really got bad when you realize you were bleeding. The story that I tell fairly regularly, my friend Peter Henry, who was the dean at NYU Business School for a number of years, he and I were playing basketball when we were kids. And you've probably played some basketball over the years. You know that if it hits your finger in the wrong way, you can hear that pop.
Right.
And so we were playing, somebody threw Peter a pass, we heard the pop. So everybody looked over at him and he was shaking his hand. He's like, ooh. And he looks down, like we all followed his eyes, and his little pinky had gone out sideways because he had dislocated it. But it wasn't until he saw it that he really started screaming. And so like once we, and Lorimer Mosley describes this really well in Explain Pain, once we kind of see what the ramifications are, then is when the pain sets in. And so our mind and our knowledge have so much to do with this overall experience. It's
no doubt.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you came out here to Chicago, and you and I met that summer. It was summer of 18, correct? I'm coming up on 3 years ago.
I wrote it down. It was summer of 18. That's correct. Yeah.
And so you'd been working on this for a little bit. And so continue to walk us through what you learned from talking to me and what happened as you started to move forward, and what was the next stage for you?
So being a big part for me was allowing myself to open up and express myself, which I really didn't do much when I was younger, even as an adult. So that was a big part. So, you were the most compassionate person I've ever met. You responded to my emails of panic, and we had a number of phone calls where, at the time the pain was brutal, but now I know it was really the emotional pain that was really scary for me. So your calls are incredible. The mind body class, after and during the class, I would be pain free. And it was just, for me, being able to express myself and share with other people and hear what they were doing. But again, it's still, nothing was really changing for the pain. I was having more confidence. I could still be active, but when I wasn't active, the pain was there. And so it was hard to really appreciate the fact that I could go out for a 40-mile bike ride, because when I get back, I would forget about that. And all I know is my feet really hurt. And then we had a discussion about psychotherapy after I probably was engaged with you for 3 or 4 months, and through a mutual contact, you kind of suggested I work with a therapist. Mm-hmm. And that was my next step.
Yeah, and I agree with you that things had shifted some. I mean, you were out in Wyoming, you were skiing hard on a number of days, you were riding your bike, and so it wasn't that the pain was completely keeping you from doing what you wanted to do. But to your point, no matter how much you worked on it, there'd be days or times or weeks or longer where it would set in, and you'd feel like you couldn't get a handle on it.
Yeah, in reality, the pain never stopped me from doing anything. In fact, that's when I felt the best. But because there's more moment, you can only be on a bike for so long, right? So there was more moments where I would have pain or sensation, and because my worldview was so small, I couldn't see beyond the pain, even if the pain wasn't there. Plus, there was the whole emotional aspect that I was just scared. I was scared, and it was embedded in me. And
yeah. And so at that point, we decided that for a variety of reasons that psychotherapy might be helpful for you. And I introduced you to Dr. Eric Sherman, who's actually been a guest on our Hope for Healing series, and is a very experienced psychotherapist in this mind-body world. And so if you're comfortable talking about it, can you tell us what that experience had been like? I know that there's a lot.
There is a lot. And it was, when you suggested, there was no hesitation on my part, but there was, it was scary. I didn't know what psychotherapy was, to be honest with you. It turns out it's just a conversation. Well, it's more than that, but I didn't know I was scared, but I was committed to it. You know, Eric was awesome. I kind of describe you as my two mentors are complete opposite. Dr. Stracks, Midwestern friendly. Eric, the true New Yorker, loud and to the point. You know, he helped me, one, recognize the insecurities I had been carrying my whole life, and which then allowed me to see how they have been moving me around and how I chose to define myself by those insecurities. Um, he helped me realize the importance of communicating. I had many times with him where I would have a spike in pain over an argument or something triggered me. And after that conversation, there was just this release in pain. And he helped me. I struggled as a student. And it turns out I have very low self-esteem from that standpoint. And he helped me kind of frame what anxiety can do to a kid. I was diagnosed with dyslexia, and my parents never took the time to tell me what that meant. So I drew my own conclusions. And so he was really helpful to kind of identify those things and put it in perspective on what I went through as a child. And very benign stuff. You know, there's no violence in my home or anything like that. And then he helped me, which is where healing truly began. He helped me see my triggers. Something that you had kept on asking me about is pay attention for spike in pain. And for me, I was always in pain. Whether I was or wasn't, I was always in pain. So I rationalized as I'm always in pain, therefore there is no spike. So Eric was there and was able to guide me after 4 months of therapy to finally see my first spike in pain. So it was pretty powerful, and he was compassionate. And you know, a few times if I was in pain, I'd tell him that, and he would always say, "Mike, I'm sorry you're in pain." And the way I reacted to that was telling, because it moved me. It could tell that's what I needed as a child. Like, I don't think I really felt seen. So every time he would recognize me, it was, you know, I'm not trying to be corny, but pretty emotional. So that was kind of one of the first steps of really paying attention to what's happening in my body and recognizing those things, because the body holds unbelievable wisdom.
And do you remember, so, you know, you'd worked with him for a while and he was asking you about the triggers and the spikes. And so do you have a memory of the first time you were able to see that?
I do. I've got 3 kids. They're all athletes. They all love to compete. I have a hard time, but I'm not the type of parent that is like uber, like go, go, go. You know, I want them to work hard, but I just want them to be happy. And I carry this heavy burden with my kids. I have a hard time seeing them disappointed, and I hold it into myself, which is the main problem. So it was my daughter was a sophomore in high school. She started her freshman year of lacrosse, or sophomore year. There's no reason she wasn't going to be starting. And I was by myself. Becky was away, and it was a scrimmage. She started at midfield, and with 5 minutes into the game, they removed her from the game. And all of a sudden, I could feel this like really scary and uncomfortable angst developing in my body. I knew I wasn't mad at the coach, because I knew it was a scrimmage and she was just trying out different players. So I could, like, consciously, I could rationalize it, but something was happening in my body. And within probably 5 minutes of this angst and hurt for my child, even though she didn't care, well, she cared, but whatever, my feet became frozen. Stand in the coldest ocean or mountain stream, except it was 60 degrees outside. It was a beautiful day, and my feet were frozen. And I had to watch the remainder of the game from the car. She got in the car. We didn't talk. I just held the steering wheel. I mean, in addition to the physical pain was the feet. over the next 2 days, the pain subsided, and I didn't think much about it. I was just like glad the pain was gone. Day or so later, I get a text message from a friend, and he made an innocent comment, but I created a story about what he really meant. And suddenly I was very mad and very hurt. And within the matter of 3 minutes, my feet became frozen, like frozen. And at that point, I put it all together. And we had my next call with Eric, and we do it FaceTime. And I shared with him, I just shared with you, and he cracked a smile. And it's just like, not bad for a dumb kid, referencing this kind of false belief I had created about myself through, even though I was very successful in business and all those things, I really had a little bit of an imposter syndrome. But that was the first time I recognized the triggers. Um, and when you and Eric would ask me, pay attention to what's happening in your body when you're triggered, I always thought you want to pay attention to the spike in pain or the emotional angst. And those are things to be on the lookout, but something happens before that. And it takes time to build this awareness, but you can feel these subtle shifts in the body. It's almost as if the body is warning you before the mind's able. It's quite powerful. And it took me a while to develop that. And one of the ways I was able to create that awareness was through meditation. Meditation has probably been my, the biggest healer for me.
And so a couple of important points in there. So one, the meditation is so helpful for people. People can learn that. I mean, people learn it all different ways. Curable app has a number of meditations, but what we know is that meditation just by itself is unlikely to cure somebody's physical symptoms. And so it's like this necessary but not sufficient quality that helps people move forward. And so what you're saying is that the meditation puts you in a place where you could start to observe what was going on. You get a little bit of a space.
I think, one of the first things you told me is try to get my nervous system relaxed. And that went right over my head. I had no idea what you're talking about. None. I just nodded. What meditation did is just that. It calmed my nervous system, which dropped the pain, which allowed me to see the triggers. And from my opinion, and everyone's journey is different, it's all about the triggers. It's all about the triggers and then following the money line, because that will tell you, or at least it has for me, what my issues were.
Yeah. And so you get this physical reaction that's short of pain, but different than where you were. And so you're talking in some sense about the wisdom of the body and how the body knows what's going on. One of my favorite studies about this, and you or people listening may have heard me talk about this before, but they put people in a room and they played a card game with them, and they would flip over cards, and you'd win or lose, play money, depending on what it showed on the card. Mm-hmm. And there were two decks, and one deck was big wins, big losses, but ultimately you'd lose. If you kept playing out of that deck, you'd go bankrupt. The other deck was little wins, little losses, but ultimately you'd keep winning and you'd gain more play money doing that. And so they'd ask people like, which deck are you going to play out of? And I don't know. And about halfway through, it's like 50 flips of the cards. People would say like, I think I should do this one. Like, I don't know why, but I think I want to keep playing out of this one. And then they'd go through all 100, like through both decks. They'd say, oh, I see. This deck, I'll keep winning money. If I use this deck, I'll go bankrupt. But they also had them hooked up to sensors and blood pressure monitors and heart rate and sweat monitors. And how many flips, like it took 100 flips for them to articulate, how many flips before their body knew which deck to play out of, do you think?
I would have no idea.
It was like 10. It was like 10% of the time for their body start to get anxious when they'd go over to this deck. Over here, their heart rate would go up, they'd start sweating a little bit. And so we oftentimes discount what our body says because it's not necessarily speaking in English, but if you can get to the point where you can tap into it, there's so much information that comes out of it.
I couldn't agree more. And, it took me some time For me, sensations were fear. I think my nervous system would become so scared of anything, someone saying something or a sensation in my body, and it would literally lock up. So what meditation has allowed me to do is, focus on my breathing, but just try to pay attention to sensations in the body, and understanding that a sensation will come and will go. I mean, I've had pain. It was probably a year and a half ago. I was doing some weeding, and felt just a slight twinge because I reached for something, and I could feel myself panic. And then seconds later, I felt like my whole back just lock up. And but through the healing, that panic and fear response doesn't happen like that anymore.
And so, I like what you're saying in terms of, there these stages and these steps that you took. You read Dr. Sarno's book, you looked into it, you reached out to me, you talked with me, you took my class, you took the step to meet with Eric. And so none of those steps on its own is what made you better, but each step built on the one before.
Yeah. And it probably took a year and a half for me to truly believe I was healing. I felt like the whole thing was put together by a piece of thread, and I was improving, but it was just hard to see at times. It was hard to see and trust. But just I believed in it so much, and reading for me was another thing. I mean, it started with TMS, and then it went to spiritual readings and Buddhism, and not Buddhism from a religion, just kind of a common sense, practical way. And the two words that stick out in my mind are impermanence. Like everything changes. You might have pain, but it's going to change. You might be happy. It's in and that has been an important lesson, because if I do get triggered, I now know it's impermanent. It's going to come and go. And then the whole clinging and grasping. I mean, I want things, as I said, we have a place in Wyoming. I love skiing powder. I'm addicted to skiing powder, and I want my kids to experience it. And when they come out, if they don't get it, I know how silly this sounds, I would be in terrible emotional and physical pain. And I was clinging, I was grasping to wanting it to be perfect. But unfortunately, this world doesn't care what we want. And I found that I was resisting anything that didn't fit my box. And that only contributed to the suffering.
Right. And so you had this recognition and breakthrough when you first started to discover that there were changes in your body in reaction to things that were going on in your life. That, you said, I think, was about 4 or 5 months after you first started working with Eric. So how did you build on that then? What were some of the next steps?
So the meditation was huge. I kind of ramped that up. I meditate every morning for 20 to 40 minutes. So I really started to, hone that practice. I started recognizing the importance of communicating, particularly with my wife. There was an incident, kind of probably, I think, the summer of 2019. It was a long Labor Day weekend, and I didn't make plans because I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. And then I started to feel really guilty for my wife. And then all of a sudden I developed this groin pain. And it took me a little bit, but to recognize the pain came from not just the guilt of not making plans, it came from the fact that I didn't share it with anyone. And I finally spoke to Becky. I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I was fearful I was going to need another hip replacement. And I expressed, I think this groin pain is the fact I felt really bad. And within a day, the pain just went away. So I really started to trying to communicate better with her. which has obviously brought us, to a different, relationship, which is kind of an amazing thing. Yoga, I developed a yoga practice before the pandemic, and I would practice yoga, try to do it every day. And I can't tell you why I was drawn to it, other than I felt better coming out of yoga than I did when I walked in, every single time. And yoga's, I was never yoga, never considered it. That and meditation were like, I could be quite the cynic with those things. And those two practices are really, truly where the healing for me came from.
And when you meditate, so you said 20 to 40 minutes, what's been some meditation strategies that you found are helpful for you? I think a lot of people who are listening, some people are very experienced meditators, some people literally just will have learned about this yesterday. And so what kind of strategies and techniques did you draw on to get to the point where you could do that on a regular basis?
Yeah, so I remember early on you suggested I meditate, and I was like, why would thinking about nothing heal my pain? That literally is what I thought. And then I started to see, and all the reading I was doing was popping up everywhere. So the first time I tried to meditate, I was still really anxious. I laid down, closed my eyes, and within probably 2 minutes, I became scared of the dark. I was fearful, and I sat up. I couldn't believe what was happening. Wiped the sweat off, thought of you, and then I laid back down, tried to do it again. And as soon as my eyes closed, I became fearful. And what I've come to understand is that, the natural human state is calm and comfortable. But if you carry a great deal of anxiety, the mind doesn't like that, and it freaks out, which is why meditation is so beautiful. So I gave it up for a couple of months because I didn't know what hit me. And then I started going. I would go to YouTube and just pick one that resonated with me. A guided meditation. I started with at first. Started with 5 minutes and worked my way up to a half hour. But I ultimately have gone to silent meditation because it truly. One can almost say that a guided meditation is a distraction. So for me, and I started with guided, but for me, silent meditation, I try to just watch my breath, deep belly breathing, because that really does calm the nervous system down, and that is proven. And then I just listen for sounds, just watch observations in my skin, thoughts. If a thought comes into my mind, I just kind of let it drift and it dissolves. I don't know, it was probably 2 months after I started meditating, I had to drive from Wyoming to Denver to bring my daughter's car back to school for her. And road trips, I used to always love them, but during this period, I struggled with road trips because I was alone and I'd get really upset and the pain would come back. On this road trip, all of a sudden, before I was into it, I was really calm. And I had no music, I was just calm. And then it hit me, it was my meditation practice. And it was like the first time I noticed meditation, like kind of really starting to spread its tentacles. And then I started thinking, worrying about why aren't I home with my wife, or why didn't a friend join me? And then those thoughts dissolved too. And it was the first time I realized that kind of thoughts are just thoughts. They're not really real. You're just making them up.
Yeah. Thoughts are just thoughts. And it's one of the lessons that we really try to emphasize with people, because until you know that, you have no idea. You think that thoughts are truth.
Sure.
And I think most people grow up and have the voice going on in their head and just assume that whatever it says is true. And I think what we're finding is that the thoughts are where some of the fear comes from. You talked about the fear of the sensations, but also when people are in their head saying things to themselves like, the pain's never going to get better. It's going to be like this for the rest of my life. I'm going to need a hip replacement, another shoulder surgery. That our thoughts can actually literally change the way our body is reacting, can create the fear. We're also starting to learn that those thoughts can create changes in the immune system. as
They're
well.
biological changes that are happening in the body. I mean, it's
Yeah.
essentially fearful thoughts over a long period of time, at least from my opinion, are
Yeah.
really changing things that happen. That's why, and I don't mean to interrupt, but like I had an anger problem. I would have an anger, not a yeller and screamer. My anger was shutting down, but it was like I was injected with a drug. Like
Mhm.
I never understood it. If something would set me off, I could literally shut my wife out for minutes, hours, and days sometime.
Mhm.
No matter how hard I wanted to open up. But now I understand there were these things that were happening inside of me through fearful thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what about communication? And so you've been working on the communication, you've taken your relationship to a new level. Are there specific strategies that you've incorporated? Is it more of a general sense, like you
Yeah,
know it's important and so you work on it?
yeah, I mean, I would say this on that healing. You have kind of knowledge and tell people to relax and understand how pain works, and those are all like really important. But deep healing is where it's at. So you can tell someone to calm down, but that really doesn't do a whole lot. So it was really, it just would happen. And it did happen. That I noticed, I would just notice things like if we're going out to dinner, my wife was 5 minutes late. I noticed I didn't care. So we're 5 minutes late. Like little changes like that.
Mhm.
Not being quite as anxious about things.
Yeah.
These times, if something happens now that I will, not a full blown trigger like I used to, but we had an incident a few weeks ago that I needed to just try to just be very aware of what was happening and take deep breaths. And it helped. It didn't, it still needed
Mhm.
to run its course, but it,
Mhm.
it helped. So for
Yeah.
me, it's kind of just an overall feeling of calm that has happened through all the things that we're talking about.
Mhm. And so with all of that, the recognition, the work that you've done, and so then at what point did you feel like, all right, the pain and the symptoms really started to shift and calm, and you started to be in a different place? Where was that?
Yeah, so I would say probably last winter. Well, no, excuse me, the winter of the pandemic. So would that be 2020?
Yep.
I was still getting triggered, but they were really spread out. Maybe once a month, and they were significant. But I was seeing them. My wife was being supportive of them, and they were not lasting as long. Um, and then when the pandemic hit, I was still working with Eric, um, but I had felt psychotherapy at that point had kind of run its course. I felt like I was bringing up the same stories, and I didn't like that. I felt like, okay, I've uncovered that. I understand my anxiety as a child. I understand my father's anger. Um, so at that point, last a year ago, February, I stopped working with him and I started working with a yoga teacher who, specializes in healing trauma. And that's that, through working with you, through reading and Eric, I was traumatized as a kid, in a very benign way. Uh, um, and she had a heavy influence in Buddhist, so she was very familiar with that, and that very much resonated with me. And we started practicing, and after probably a month of working with her, she developed a yin yoga practice for me, which is, it's essentially holding a stretch for 5 minutes. And the theory goes is those stretches are teaching the nervous system that if you can hold that stretch, which is very painful, once you come out of it, you'll be fine. So it teaches the nervous system to cycle into a difficult moment, but more importantly, cycle out. And that was my problem, is when I would become fearful subconsciously, I would block up, and I wouldn't know how to cycle out until days went by. So we would do that, and I practiced it on my own. And then probably a month into it, after the yoga practice, I was lying on my back and just lying, and I noticed my right butt cheek starting trembling. I then noticed my left leg started trembling, and then all of a sudden my whole lower torso was shaking. And Dr. Peter Levine's work of somatic experiencing is releasing trauma through the body. And what happens is these long yin poses were allowing me and pushing my body, that while when it came back into rest, it felt comfortable enough to just let go, And the last major trigger I had was when the pandemic started. And since that point, I've got this, and that trembling went on for almost 2 months every day. And it was fascinating. I've been cautioned by my spiritual leader, if you will, that, that everyone's experience is different. Some it's trembling, others it could be a flushing of the skin, you could be crying. But since that, this amazing sense of calmness, confidence, things that, anxieties go into my kids' athletics game. It doesn't mean I'm not emotional, but it doesn't. If my daughter's taken out of a game like she was the other day, it's like, oh no, now what? Or I had a little problem back here a couple days ago. It's since gone, but there was not this panic. So yeah, so that was, and I think my work up to work, I think if I had gone to her directly before, I think Eric was part of the solution. I think reading was part of it. I think working with you in the mind body, I think it was all together. And I think also everyone's journey is different. I think, you got to try what works for you and listen to your body. And that's probably the one, in addition to meditation and yoga, the one thing is listen to the body. Not when you get sore, if you're exercising, it's these subtle shifts that happen. Or if someone says something and it kind of annoys you, like that's a trigger, and you can start to investigate those things. And for me, once I've learned this awareness, I can't let, it's how I live my life now. And it's awesome. I have this amazing awareness of what's going on around me and in me.
Yeah. And so there's a lot in what you said there. One
I know,
highlight.
I'm sorry
No, it's great. It's great. One highlight that I'll make is just how much you had learned so that your body can start trembling, and you watch it with this attitude of curiosity and calmness, so that it can let it take its course. Because so often what happens to us, if something like that happens, we immediately think like, oh my goodness, I have multiple sclerosis. Who am I going to talk to so that I can get this diagnosed and treated? And you're describing essentially the exact opposite of watching something very unusual happen in your body and letting it play out and not letting it alarm you. And then our bodies know how to work out what needs working out.
Our bodies know how to heal. People used to always tell me that. I'm like, that's a load of crap. I'm in pain for 3 years now. The body doesn't know how to heal, but it truly does. I was resisting, The fact is, I didn't know this now, and I needed to go through what I went through. But for the first 2 years of this journey, I was essentially holding my breath, waiting for the pain to disappear so I could finally exhale and say it's going to be all right. But the fact is, because I was doing that, it can't work that way. For me, it really isn't about the frozen feet or the painful arms. It's what happens before that. I mean, that was just a way my emotions pour out of my body.
It's that, I think what you said, it's that in-between space where like subtly things start to shift, And when you can notice that, then you can figure out how you want to react. When the significant pain comes, your feet are frozen, it's sort of, things have moved forward and you've missed the cues that you
That's
get
right.
now.
That's right.
When you react.
I don't know if I could have done anything quicker. My sense is probably not. So my only advice is just stay the course and trust the process, because I still don't believe what I went through. And there's thousands of people like me. It's truly amazing that emotions, well, it's not amazing actually, but how emotions can impact our body. And it shouldn't be that surprising. I mean, think about when a young boy blushes when he sees a pretty girl, something like that, or you get an upset stomach before a big public speaking event. I mean, the mind has manifestations in the body.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've always known this. Humans have always known it, but the medical system kind of has learned to dismiss that in people. And so you said very early on that the system sort of sees our bodies as machines and you just tinker in the right way. And your story is the opposite of that, of learning how to connect with your mind and your heart and your spirit and all of that. That's what ultimately made you better. You also said that everybody's journey is different, which is something that I've learned over the years. The other part of it is that you couldn't have predicted how the journey would unfold when you started it. And so,
I
yes, exactly.
Yes.
But at each step, you learned what you needed to learn. And in the process of doing that, it unlocked another step for you.
It did. And I would also say this, that signs of healing typically were not recognized in the moment. It was kind of recognized a day later, like, that happened. Or, I noticed one day, like, our guards looked really rich in bloom. I'm like, Becky, what do we do? She's like, this is how they look every year. It's like, really? This is sweet.
It's funny sort of how we sort of open our mind to that. I have memory. I played golf in college and went to college in New England, and every year the colors would start to change the day after the golf season ended. Like I wouldn't notice that the golf season would end. I'd be like, whoa, like it is fantastic. I'm so glad I'm in New England.
Right.
And it took me a number of years to recognize that like it didn't actually change the day the golf season ended. It's just my focus opened up and I could see it.
Yeah.
So your story is amazing. It's an amazing journey. And these days, my sense is there's very little physical pain, certainly, and not really any fear of the pain. It's not that you don't get symptoms anymore, correct?
That is correct. I don't get pain. I do at times get sensations, and that would be from a triggered event. But they are super subtle, and they could be just maybe some warmth in my arm, or my feet might get a little cold. But I now know what to do. I need to communicate. I need to practice yoga, and I need to be aware what's happening in my emotional world so I can understand this. I mean, part of, and I had mentioned to you through this journey, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, that actually when I started going to psychotherapy, after I met Eric the first time, I was reading a book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but he talked about just surrendering wherever the life takes you, whatever your purpose is, and don't fight it. And at that moment, I became committed to writing a book and wanting to share with the world what I've been through. And I am going to get it published here. I picked up a publisher, so it'll be coming out in December sometime. And it's a memoir, but it's also a self-help. We'll talk about what is childhood trauma and what does that look like. Talk about kind of Western medicine, and they do some fabulous things, but they also really really missed the boat and become over reliant on x-rays and imaging. And a big part of it is the healing part of it. And it's funny, when I first started writing the book and started sharing with people, and I'm writing the book to help people. And if I can help one person, that's great. But friends would say that must be so therapeutic for you. And when they would say that to me, it would trigger me, because what I thought they were saying is, you're not going to be good enough to write to help people, but maybe it'll help. Really thought it was condescending. And I truly was offended. Like, in the body, I felt the movement. I felt the childlike hurt. And that went on for probably at least a year while I was writing the book. And then you asked about healing. It was about 6 months ago. Someone said that to me. It must be so therapeutic to you. And I said, you're damn right it is. Like, it feels, and it has been. I mean, you got us to journal one time, I remember, and that went right over my head. You know, I tried, I'm like, this is awkward. But writing this book is essentially journaling. And it's the healing I get from reading my work is, you know, it allows me to see, like, truly see where I was hiding and why, what these insecurities I carried. And I might be, you know, I don't know, I might be this, like, an outlier. I don't know. Maybe I was pretty extreme, but I think hopefully when you get away from the extremes, people will be able to see parts of themselves in there. And maybe, if nothing else, it will help them stay on the path, you know, and not give up.
Yeah. And so what's the book called, did you say?
The name, I just came up with the title about last week. It's My Pain Body Solution, A Journey to the Other Side of Suffering.
Great.
And pain body was coined by the spiritual leader Eckhart Tolle. Yeah.
Good. And when's it going to be available for people?
That will be available probably at the latest the first of the year.
Okay, great. Well, we will keep an eye out for it. I'm super excited for it to come out. So anyway, we'll go ahead and wind up. Just thinking back on what essentially has been a 3-year journey now. And for people who are listening and trying to sum up, because we've talked about a lot and you've done a tremendous amount in a variety of ways, how do you look back on it? So the short version of, what was the pain about when you were experiencing it? I guess that's my question. Like, how do you look back on it and say, like, okay, I know the pain was there because what?
Yeah, I think mine was, it's a really good question. I think for me, it was two issues. I had a very low self-esteem and felt I was not smart. I felt that's what everyone thought of me. And those were really carried with me from a very, very, very young age. So low self-esteem as well. I was from a big family and I was one of the youngest kids. And I think there was some abandonment issues. And I learned that not from so much recalling the story of growing up, because I had a fine childhood, I really did. But as you listen to your body, when you start to see, when you get triggered, you're like, just because a friend doesn't return a text message, that's like that's an abandonment issue. So those are kind of the drivers, and it then kind of spilled out from there. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Well, it does. And then I think what happens in the body is that we get triggered because of these experiences that we've had. Something, you know, you think somebody says something about your intelligence or your example, you know, you text somebody and they don't get back to you. And then the brain starts to get scared. And in order to deal with that, then it starts to create pain. And then we can focus on the pain instead of focusing on the fact that we're feeling inadequate or our feelings are hurt, or we have to take a step in communication that we don't know how to or don't want to do. And so the pain functions as a distraction for us and a place to move towards, so that we don't have to deal with something that's so uncomfortable. And what I love about your story is that you learned how to enter into those uncomfortable places so that they are no longer particularly uncomfortable for you, or you've learned enough that you can sit with the discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
And allow it to be okay.
The pain at some point during my journey, the pain and triggers became an opportunity for discovery is really kind of what it was all about.
Yeah.
One of the doctors, just so people have an idea, I mean, I was told never to ski again, told never to backpack, don't do anything pounding. When they gave me some injections that didn't work, he basically said he can fuse my spine. I mean, it almost felt like a threat. And today, and I'm not trying to brag, but I am really active. And, I just listen to my body.
Yeah.
And I do need to be a little bit more kind to you. I remember you had mentioned that, like maybe you're a little hard on yourself, and you can be hard on yourself physically, but also be down on yourself. And I never once understood that concept. And so that's an important thing too, is just take it easy on yourself.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me also how often I hear people as they get better start to recognize that, and what I say to people all the time, the pain's not the enemy. The pain wasn't trying to make your life miserable. The pain was giving you clues about things that you needed to do to live your life the way that you wanted to live it, which you get to do now.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, what the pain has given me is I don't get angry anymore. And I now know with absolute certainty, every time I got mad at my wife, it had nothing to do with her. It had to do, something was coming up within me that scared me. I didn't know what it was. And the only way I knew to do was take control of it and create an issue that had nothing to do with that. So without the pain, I wouldn't have that. And I can't tell you, I wouldn't trade that for $1 million. I wouldn't.
Yeah. Any last thoughts for people before we sign off this evening?
I would say we're kind of touching on it. Just try meditation. And if you start thinking about things, you're doing a perfect job, because that's what meditation is. It's just be there and watch them come and go, and listen to the body, and just listen to the subtleties and things throw you off. It's like, and we all have them. I know we do.
Thank you so much for being here, for being open, for sharing your experience, and for walking us through what you've done. It's just remarkable. It's a remarkable story.
I hope it wasn't too much. I know I threw a lot out there.
No, I look forward to reading about it in the draft of your book, and then when the book comes out. And I know how much people appreciate you and everybody else who comes on and is open and vulnerable and talks about how you've managed to heal. So thank you.
Right. You're welcome.
Thank you also to everybody who's been here and listening. Every time we record an episode, I'm reminded of how blessed and touched I am to be part of this amazing community of people who are working on healing themselves in this brave and creative mind-body way. As I said earlier, if you're interested in talking with us at our office about how we can help you, we've been able to expand our telehealth options and make that permanent at this point. So if you're interested in talking with me or my assistant, Michelle Grimm, you can request information through our website at www.drstracks.com. Our staff will get back to you with all the instructions and information that you need. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find the recording and all of our previous episodes at Curable and my Hope for Healing page, which is curablehealth.com/hope for healing. You can also sign up for our office newsletter and get updates about next episodes and everything else that's going on in our practice. I will be back with another episode in 4 weeks. I hope you can join us then. Until then, I hope everybody has a wonderful start to their summer and everybody stays safe and healthy. And with that, we will say good night.